He burst out laughing when I placed my resignation letter on his desk. In his eyes, I was just another dreamer who'd come crawling back, begging for my old cubicle. But he was wrong. Dead wrong. And every postcard I sent from Europe would become a bitter reminder of just how badly he'd misjudged me. The stack of glossy cards from Paris, Rome, Barcelona, each one a dagger to his pride, each stamp a victory lap around his crumbling empire. My name is Claire Monroe, and for 5 years, I'd been slowly suffocating in a glass tower in downtown Denver, 32 years old, with a master's degree in marketing and enough creative campaigns in my portfolio to wallpaper the entire 23rd floor of Brightsphere Solutions. Yet I was still fetching coffee for a man who couldn't tell the difference between Instagram and TikTok. Richard Halden. Even thinking his name made my jaw clench. 6'2" of pure corporate arrogance wrapped in Italian suits that cost more than my monthly rent. He'd been my direct supervisor for 3 years. And in that time, he'd managed to take credit for every successful campaign I'd created while somehow making my failures spectacularly public. The office atmosphere at Brightsphere was what you'd get if you mixed high school politics with gladiatorial combat and threw in some casual misogyny for flavor. Open floor plan meant nowhere to hide when Richard decided to humiliate someone. His favorite stage was the Monday morning meetings, where he'd dissect weekend emails with the precision of a sadistic surgeon. Monroe's suggestion for the Patterson account he'd announced just last week, holding up my proposal like it was contaminated. This is what happens when people think creativity means throwing glitter at mediocrity. The room had laughed, that nervous, grateful laugh of people just happy they weren't today's target. I'd spent years swallowing these moments, filing them away in a mental folder labeled "Things That Will Make Me Stronger." But they weren't making me stronger. They were making me smaller, dimmer. Like a light slowly being strangled by a dimmer switch controlled by someone else's hand. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I'd pitched a revolutionary social media strategy for our biggest client, something that would have put us ahead of every competitor. Richard had listened, nodded, then presented my exact idea to the board the next day as his own. When I confronted him, he'd simply smiled and said, "That's the price of education, Monroe. Someday you'll have your own ideas worth stealing." That night, I sat in my Capitol Hill apartment, staring at my laptop screen. My savings account showed $23,000. Not much, but enough. My browser had 15 tabs open: flights to Paris, hostels in Amsterdam, train passes for Europe, the dream I'd pushed down since college, when student loans and being practical had seemed more important than being alive. My phone buzzed with another after-hours email from Richard. "Need the Whitman presentation revised by 7 a.m. Third draft wasn't quite there." I looked at that email for a long moment. Then I closed my laptop, pulled out a piece of paper, and wrote the shortest resignation letter in corporate history. "I resign, effective immediately. C. Monroe." The next morning, I walked into Brightsphere for the last time. My desk was already cleaned out. I'd been slowly removing personal items for weeks, a careful erosion that no one had noticed. Richard was in his corner office, feet up on his desk, practicing his putting stroke with a 9-iron that probably cost more than most people's cars. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, a small rebellion that felt like revolution. "Monroe, those revisions better be..." I placed the resignation letter on his desk, right on top of his Wall Street Journal. The transformation of his face was almost worth the past 3 years. Confusion, annoyance, then understanding, and finally, amusement. Pure, condescending amusement. That's when he laughed. The laugh started as a chuckle, then erupted into full-bodied hilarity that made his shoulders shake. Richard actually had to put down his 9-iron to wipe tears from his eyes. I stood there, hands steady despite the rage building in my chest, watching him enjoy what he clearly thought was the best joke he'd heard all year. "Oh, Monroe," he finally gasped, catching his breath. "Oh, this is precious. Really, it is." He picked up my resignation letter between 2 fingers like it was a used tissue. "Let me guess, you're going to find yourself. Maybe start a blog, become an influencer." He stood up, walked around his massive mahogany desk, and leaned against it, arms crossed. The morning sun through his floor-to-ceiling windows created a halo effect around him that made me want to throw something. You know what's going to happen, don't you? His voice dropped to that patronizing tone he used when explaining basic concepts to clients. You'll burn through your savings in, 3 months? Maybe 4 if you're eating ramen. Then reality will hit. Bills, rent, student loans. He counted each word on his fingers. And then you'll come crawling back here, begging for your job. Except, and here's the beautiful part, your position will already be filled by someone younger, hungrier, and definitely less delusional. I felt my fingernails digging into my palms. I'm going to Europe, I said, voice steady as granite. This triggered another wave of laughter. Europe? Of course, the millennial retirement plan. Run away to Europe and pretend you're in some eat, pray, love fantasy. He walked back to his chair, already dismissing me. Send me a postcard from your hostel. Monroe. Better yet, send me one when you're at the airport, buying your ticket home with the last of your credit limit. He buzzed his assistant. Jennifer, post Monroe's position on LinkedIn. She's having a quarter-life crisis. Then, loud enough for the entire floor to hear through his open door, everyone, gather round Monroe. Here is abandoning ship to go find herself in Europe. Within minutes, a crowd had formed. My co-workers, people I'd shared lunch breaks and deadline panic with, were looking at me with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Richard was in full performance mode now. This, people, is what happens when you confuse Instagram with reality. When you think life is about experiences instead of excellence, Monroe here thinks she's too good for the grind, too special for the real world. He gestured at me like I was a cautionary tale made flesh. 6 months? Hell, I'll be generous. 3 months. And she'll be sending her resume from some internet cafe, begging for an internship. Someone snickered, then another. The laughter spread like a virus through the crowd. Sarah from HR was shaking her head. Tom from accounts actually took a photo, probably for his group chat titled Corporate Disasters. Richard picked up my resignation letter again. You know what, I'm going to frame this. Hang it right there. He pointed to his wall of achievements. As a reminder of what happens when people overestimate their worth in the market. My face burned, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I turned to leave, then stopped at his door. You're right about one thing, Richard, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I will send you postcards. He smirked. Can't wait to see them. Nothing says I've made a terrible mistake like a desperate postcard from Prague. As I walked through the cubicle maze for the last time, I heard the whispers following me like a toxic shadow. Career suicide. Lost it. Richard's finally broken her. Someone had already updated the office group chat, Claire pulling a midlife crisis at 32. But as the elevator doors closed, shutting out their voices and their small, frightened lives, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years possibility. Richard thought he'd won. He thought he'd humiliated me into submission, or at least into a spectacular failure he could dine out on for years. He had no idea what was coming. I walked out of Brightsphere Solutions into the Denver morning. Phone already open to my flight booking. Paris first, I decided. And yes, I would send him a postcard. The first of many. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of the Seine, watching the sunrise paint Notre Dame in shades of gold and rose. My feet ached from walking 16 miles the day before. My hostel roommate snored like a chainsaw. And I'd eaten nothing but bread and cheese for 3 days. I'd never been happier. Paris hit me like a beautiful slap in the face. The first night, I'd gotten hopelessly lost in the Latin Quarter. My phone dead, my French laughable. I'd ended up crying on a bench near the Pantheon, wondering if Richard had been right. Then an elderly woman sat beside me, offered me a tissue and half her sandwich, and pointed me toward my hostel without understanding a word I said. Human kindness without performance reviews or KPIs. I found my rhythm slowly. morning coffee at the same cafe where the barista, Henri, taught me to properly pronounce croissant while laughing at my American accent. Afternoons in museums where time meant nothing. Evenings watching street artists near Sacré-Cœur, their freedom both inspiring and terrifying. On my 5th day, I bought my first postcard from a tourist shop near the Eiffel Tower. The image the tower at sunset, aggressively beautiful. I sat at a cafe, pen hovering over the blank space, thinking about what to write to Richard. From Paris, where success isn't measured in PowerPoints. Turns out creativity flourishes when it's not being suffocated in conference rooms. C. I addressed it to his office, imagining Jennifer sorting through his mail, seeing my handwriting, the French postmark. The thought made me smile. Berlin came next. The city's raw energy was nothing like Paris's elegant chaos. I stayed in Kreuzberg, where graffiti was art and art was rebellion. On my 3rd night, I met Marcus, a street artist from Barcelona, spray painting a mural on a legal wall. He let me add a small corner, just abstract swirls, but mine. You have anger in your lines, he said, studying my edition. Good anger, the kind that builds things. I sent Richard a postcard of the Berlin Wall's remains. Greetings from Berlin, where they know something about tearing down oppressive structures. Some walls deserve to fall. See? Florence seduced me differently. I'd planned 3 days. I stayed 2 weeks. Found a tiny art studio offering drop-in classes near Santo Spirito. The instructor, Julia, spoke just enough English to correct my terrible technique. You paint like you're afraid, she told me, repositioning my hand on the brush. Like someone is watching, judging. Here, no one cares. Paint like you're alone in the world. For the first time since college, I did. Terrible landscapes, worse portraits, but mine. One afternoon, I painted Brightsphere's office building, then painted over it with a sunset so violent it looked like the whole structure was on fire. Julia hung it on the studio wall. Catharsis, she said, nodding approvingly. The postcard from Florence showed the Duomo at dawn. Richard, they have a word here. Sprezzatura, studied carelessness. The art of making the difficult look effortless. You never learned it. You just made everything look difficult. C. Barcelona was where I found my groove. 3 weeks in, I was staying in a shared apartment in Gracia, my Spanish improving daily, my savings depleting slower than expected. I'd learned to live on $30 a day, sometimes less. Marcus, the artist from Berlin, had given me his contacts. I spent evenings with his crew, watching them transform blank walls into stories. You should document this, one of them suggested, seeing my phone full of photos. Start an Instagram, show people what leaving looks like. Exit. Strategy. Claire was born. My first post a photo of my resignation letter next to a glass of Rioja. Step 1, leave. Step 2, live. Within a week, I had 1,000 followers, former co-workers, strangers, other corporate refugees. The comments section became a support group for the desperately employed. The Barcelona postcard was my masterpiece. The Sagrada Familia, still under construction after 140 years. Still building something beautiful here. Unlike your quarterly projections, some things are worth the time. How's that Q3 report treating you? C. Each postcard was a small act of war. I chose them carefully, wrote them deliberately, knowing they'd arrive at Brightsphere like tiny grenades of possibility. Jennifer told me later that Richard had started keeping them in his desk drawer, but not before everyone in the office had seen them, read them, shared photos in the group chat. I was becoming a legend I'd never intended to be, the woman who actually left, who was actually doing it, who was actually free. Jennifer started texting me updates 6 weeks into my travels. We'd never been close at the office. Richard made sure to isolate potential allies. But distance had made her brave. He keeps your postcards in his top drawer, takes them out sometimes, stares at them like they're contaminated. You're getting to him. At first, Richard had treated my postcards like office entertainment. He'd read them aloud in meetings, adding his own commentary. Monroe's having her little gap year, he'd say, waving my card from Amsterdam. Let's see how poetic she is when the euros run out. But something shifted after the Florence postcard. Jennifer said he'd gone quiet when he read it, then shoved it in his drawer without showing anyone. The next Monday meeting, when someone asked about Claire's latest, he'd snapped that they had better things to discuss than failed employees. Meanwhile, my exit strategy Claire account had exploded to 15,000 followers. I wasn't trying to be an influencer. God. Richard would have loved that irony, but people were hungry for proof that leaving was possible. I posted photos of my morning coffee in different cities. Total cost $2. My hostel rooms $15 a night. My grocery hauls $20 for a week. The comments were desperate. How do you afford this? I have $15K saved. Is that enough? My boss is like Richard. This gives me hope. The Richard references had become a thing. I'd never named him directly. But my followers had pieced together the story from my captions. He'd become a symbol, every toxic boss, every credit-stealing supervisor, every gaslighting middle manager. Pull a Claire started trending in small circles, shorthand for leaving a toxic job. Tom from accounts apparently showed Richard the hashtag. Jennifer's text was frantic. He's losing it, called a meeting about social media policies. Everyone knows it's about you. I was in Prague when I sent the postcard that really got under his skin. The image Kafka's museum. The message, they have a whole museum here dedicated to bureaucratic nightmares and existential dread. Reminded me of your Monday meetings. The difference, Kafka intended his to be absurd. See, Sarah from HR forwarded me Richard's email to the team. Effective immediately. Any communication with former employees on company time will be considered theft of resources. But the postcards had already done their damage. Jennifer reported that 3 people had quit in the past month. The junior designers had started calling Richard Halden the Hope Killer in their private Slack. Someone had printed out my Barcelona postcard and pinned it inside their cubicle. Richard's response was predictable. He got meaner. Longer hours, weekend emails, public humiliations that made his previous behavior look gentle. He was trying to prove something, that I was the problem, not him. That leaving was weakness, not strength. Then came the Amsterdam postcard. I debated sending it, knowing it would escalate things. The image Van Gogh's bedroom in Arles. The message. Van Gogh died poor and unknown. Now he's immortal, and his boss is forgotten. Legacy isn't made in conference rooms. Richard. How will they remember you? See? According to Jennifer, he'd thrown it in the trash, then retrieved it, then torn it in half, then taped it back together. She found it on his desk the next morning, perfectly smoothed out, like evidence in a crime he was trying to solve. The office had started taking bets on when I'd run out of money and come back. Richard had publicly put $500 on before Christmas. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my Instagram had attracted attention from travel brands, small sponsorships, nothing life-changing, but enough to extend my runway. A hostel chain offered free stays in exchange for posts. A backpack company sent me gear. My former coworkers were watching me transform in real time through social media. Every post showed me lighter, brighter, more myself. Meanwhile, their posts showed the same conference room, the same forced smile at company events, the same soul-crushing commute. Marcus from accounts quit next, citing personal reasons. He sent me a message. You were right. Life's too short for Richards. Then Kelly from sales. Then 2 junior developers Richard had been terrorizing for months. Richard's LinkedIn post about loyalty in the modern workplace got ratioed so hard he deleted it. Someone had commented with a photo of my postcards arranged like a tarot spread on their desk. The caption, My Daily Motivation. Jennifer's latest update included a photo Richard in his office, late at night, alone. He was staring at something on his desk. She zoomed in. It was my postcards, spread out like he was trying to decode them. He's obsessed, Claire, completely obsessed. You're in his head rent-free, and he knows the whole office knows it. Month 3 hit me in Lisbon. I woke up in my hostel to check my bank balance, $1.847. The Instagram sponsorships helped, but they weren't enough to sustain this indefinitely. For the first time since leaving Denver, I felt the cold finger of doubt tap my shoulder. I sat on a bench overlooking the Tagus River, doing the math for the 100th time. If I went ultra-budget, I could stretch it another 2 months, maybe 3. But then what? The thought of returning to Denver, to Richard's smirking face, made my stomach clench. That night, I couldn't sleep. My roommate, a 22-year-old from Seoul living her post-graduation dream, asked what was wrong. "I'm scared I'm proving my old boss right," I admitted in the darkness. "Are you happier now than before?" she asked. "Yes." "Then he's already wrong." Simple. But at 3 a.m., staring at the hostel ceiling, it didn't feel simple. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my old work emails, still saved in a folder called Evidence, Richard's Greatest Hits, Disappointing Effort, Monroe. This is what mediocrity looks like. Maybe marketing isn't your forte. Then I opened Instagram. A message from a follower. "Your posts saved my life. I was going to kill myself rather than go back to my job Monday. You showed me there was a third option." I sat up, read it again, then scrolled through more messages I'd been ignoring. Hundreds of them. People who'd quit their toxic jobs, who'd stood up to their Richards, who'd chosen themselves. I wasn't just sending postcards anymore. I was sending permission slips. The next morning, I made a decision. If I was going down, I was going down swinging. I started a blog linked to my Instagram, Exit Strategy: A Guide to Leaving. Practical advice, how much to save, where to find cheap accommodation, how to travel on $30 a day. But also, emotional support, how to handle the guilt, the fear, the 3 a.m. panics. The first post got 10,000 views in 24 hours. Someone shared it on LinkedIn with the comment, "Required reading for anyone under Richard Halden style management." That's when things got interesting. Jennifer texted me, "Richard saw the LinkedIn share. He's threatening to sue you for defamation." "I never named him," I replied. "Everyone knows it's him. He's becoming a meme." "Claire." Someone made a toxic boss bingo with his quotes. I was in Copenhagen when I decided to escalate. The postcard showed the Little Mermaid statue. The message, "She gave up her voice for legs." I got mine back by using them to walk away. Still swimming. Richard. You still drowning. See. According to multiple sources, my network of Brightsphere refugees was growing. Richard had called a company-wide meeting about maintaining professional standards and the danger of social media narcissism. He'd gone on for 45 minutes about former employees who couldn't hack it, trying to justify their failures through public exhibitionism. Tom sent me a recording. Richard sounded unhinged. His voice cracked twice. He mentioned certain individuals 11 times. Everyone knew he meant me. But the best part, his performance was suffering. Jennifer forwarded me an email from the board to Richard about concerning trends in team retention and negative Glassdoor reviews. The Patterson account, the one he'd stolen my idea for, had complained about lack of innovation. His team was hemorrhaging talent, and everyone above him was starting to notice. Meanwhile, I was broke but alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. In Stockholm. I worked a few shifts at a cafe in exchange for meals. In Oslo. I taught English for cash. It wasn't glamorous. Richard would have loved knowing I was washing dishes, but it was honest. My hands were dirty from work I'd chosen, not clean from work that was killing me. Each postcard became sharper, more precise. From Brussels. The EU has strict regulations about workplace bullying. America should take notes. How's that hostile work environment treating you? See? From Munich. Beer halls here remind me of your leadership style, loud, intoxicating, and ultimately leaving everyone with a headache. Prost. See? Jennifer's updates became increasingly dramatic. Richard was making mistakes. Big ones. He'd screamed at a client on a call. He'd presented the wrong deck to investors. He'd been caught bad-mouthing the CEO after too many drinks at a company event. "He's unraveling," she wrote. It's like watching a slow-motion car crash. Everyone knows it's because of you. You're the ghost haunting this place. My follower count hit 50,000. Brands were reaching out for actual paid partnerships. Travel companies wanted me to review their services. A publisher inquired about a book deal. The girl who Richard said would come crawling back was building something he couldn't understand, a life on her own terms. But the money was still running out. I had maybe 6 weeks left, even with the new income streams. The clock was ticking, and Richard probably knew it. What he didn't know was that I'd already won. Every person who'd quit Brightsphere, every follower who'd left their toxic job, every postcard that reminded him of his smallness, the victory was already complete. I just needed to land the final blow. Barcelona welcomed me back like an old friend. 5 months into my journey, I'd come full circle to where I'd found my stride. The apartment in Gracia was available again. The art crew remembered me, and the city's energy felt like home in a way Denver never had. I sat at my favorite cafe near Park Güell, crafting what I knew would be my most important postcard yet. The image, a stunning sunset over the Mediterranean. The kind of orange and pink that looked fake but wasn't. The kind of beauty Richard would never see from his corner office. But first, I needed to perfect the message. I'd written and rewritten it 12 times. You said I'd come crawling back. Strange, from here, it looks like you're the one on your knees. Heard about the board meeting. How does it feel when the spotlight finally finds you? See. Too aggressive. I tried again. The Mediterranean is beautiful this time of year. You should see it sometime. Oh wait, you can't. Tied to that desk while your empire crumbles. My condolences. See. Still not right. I wanted surgical precision, not blind rage. My phone buzzed. Jennifer. But this wasn't her usual update. It was a link to an internal memo, leaked by someone in HR. My hands shook as I read it. Effective immediately. Richard Halden will be stepping down from his position as marketing director to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors. Corporate speak for "you're fired." I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling nothing. Then, everything. Then, nothing again. 5 months of postcards, of small rebellions from afar, of building my own life while his imploded, and now, without warning, it was over. Jennifer called. Claire, it happened this morning. The board called an emergency meeting yesterday. Someone, nobody knows who, compiled all the exit interviews from the past year. Every single person mentioned Richard. Then they found out about the Patterson account complaint, the screaming at clients, the hostile work environment claims piling up in HR. But Claire? Everyone's saying it was the postcards that started it. You became the symbol of everyone who'd had enough. I couldn't speak. The best part, Jennifer continued, barely containing her glee. He had to pack his office while everyone watched. Security stood there the whole time. And Claire? He took your postcards, every single one. They were the last things he packed. I looked down at the blank postcard in my hand, the one I'd been crafting so carefully, the killing blow I'd planned to deliver. But Richard had already fallen on his own sword, pushed by the avalanche I'd started with a simple resignation letter. There's more, Jennifer said. The CEO wants to talk to you. Something about heading up a new remote marketing initiative, full creative control, work from anywhere. They want to show they're changing, and you've become the symbol of what they want to be. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The job Richard said I'd beg for was now begging for me. But sitting there, with Barcelona's sunshine on my face and freedom in my lungs, I knew my answer. Tell them thanks, but no. I said, I've got my own thing going now. And I did. The blog had attracted a literary agent. The Instagram had become a business. 3 different travel companies wanted me as a brand ambassador. I was making more than my Brightsphere salary, doing what Richard had mocked, living, exploring, creating. But I still had one postcard to send. I rewrote the message one final time, keeping it simple. Richard, heard about your new journey. Starting over is terrifying, isn't it? But sometimes the fall is the only way to find out if you can fly. Despite everything, I hope you find your wings. C. I addressed it to his home address. LinkedIn made that easy enough to find. Then I added a PS. PS, you were wrong. I didn't come crawling back. But you were also right about one thing. I did send you postcards. Everyone a reminder that the prison was never the job. It was the fear of leaving. You're free now, too. Use it well. I dropped it in the mail and walked back toward the beach. My phone was buzzing with messages, opportunities, congratulations from the thousands who'd followed this journey. But I ignored them all for the moment. The Mediterranean stretched out before me, endless and blue and full of possibility. Somewhere in Denver, Richard Halden was packing up his corner office, his certainty, his small kingdom of cruelty. And here I was, brokish but not broken, proven but not proud, victorious but not vengeful. The postcard would arrive in a week. It would be the last one he'd receive from me, but probably not the last he'd think about. Every time he saw a postcard, every time someone mentioned Europe, every time he heard about someone leaving their job, he'd remember. He'd remember the woman he laughed at who ended up having the last laugh without even trying for it. I stood in the Piazza San Pietro in Rome 3 weeks later, watching the sun set behind St. Peter's Basilica. The call from Jennifer had come that morning. Richard had received my final postcard. She'd heard from his former assistant, who'd remained friends with the cleaning staff at his apartment building. They'd seen him checking his mail, finding the envelope with the Barcelona postmark, and standing in his building's lobby for a full 5 minutes, just holding it. He never came back to collect his things from storage, Jennifer had added. Maintenance finally boxed up his awards and certificates. Nobody knows where he went. The strange thing was, I felt no satisfaction hearing this. No victory dance, no champagne moment. Standing among the tourists and pilgrims in Rome, I realized the revenge had transformed into something else entirely. Something I hadn't expected. My phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged Exit Strategy Claire in a post. I opened it to find a message from an account I didn't recognize. Second Act Diha. The post was a photo of a highway stretching into desert mountains. The caption read, Day 1, she was right. The prison was never the job. R.H. Richard Halden. I clicked on the profile. 3 posts total. All from the last week. The first, that highway. The second, a tent under stars somewhere in what looked like Utah. The third, a sunrise from the Grand Canyon. No motivational quotes, no corporate buzzwords, just images of movement, of space, of someone learning what air tasted like outside a glass tower. My followers found his account within hours. Some attacked, calling him out for years of abuse. But Richard didn't respond, didn't defend, didn't engage. He just kept posting. A diner in Flagstaff, a motel in Albuquerque, a sunset in Sedona. Raw, unfiltered, imperfect shots from someone who'd clearly never used Instagram for anything but corporate promotion. Then came the post that stopped me cold. A photo of my postcards. All of them, laid out on what looked like the hood of a car. The caption, carried these 2,000 miles. Finally understand they weren't weapons. They were maps. The comments exploded. My followers were confused, angry, sympathetic, skeptical. Was this genuine a manipulation, a breakdown? But I knew something they didn't. Richard Halden, who'd never admitted a mistake in his life, who'd built an identity on never showing weakness, was doing something I'd never imagined possible. He was changing. Not redemption. That would take years, if ever. Not forgiveness. That wasn't mine to give for all the people he'd hurt. But change. The kind that comes when your carefully constructed world collapses and you realize the debris isn't crushing you, it's freeing you. I found myself in the Sistine Chapel the next day, neck craned to see Michelangelo's masterpiece, God reaching toward Adam, that tiny gap between their fingers where all of human history lived. The space between what was and what could be. My book agent called, publishers were interested, but they wanted a specific angle. The revenge story sells, she said. The takedown of the toxic boss. That's your brand now. But standing under that ceiling, I realized that wasn't my story anymore. It had started as revenge. Yes, those first postcards had been weapons, each word chosen to wound. But somewhere between Berlin and Barcelona, between Florence and Rome, they'd become something else. Not weapons, but mirrors. Showing Richard and everyone watching that another life was possible. I opened Instagram and drafted a post. A photo of the Sistine Chapel's famous fingers, almost touching. 5 months ago, my boss laughed when I quit. I sent him postcards from Europe to prove him wrong. He lost his job, his status, everything he'd built. I thought that would be my victory. But here's what I learned. Revenge is just the beginning. It burns down the prison, but then what? You still have to build something new. Richard Halden is somewhere in the American Southwest. Learning what I learned in Europe, that the opposite of a toxic life isn't destruction. It's creation. It's choosing who you become when no one's watching. When there's no quarterly review, no ladder to climb. Just you and the horizon. I won. But not the way I expected. Because the best revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's showing them they can fly, then watching them choose to jump. Second act. The sky's big enough for both of us. I posted it and turned off my phone. Tomorrow I'd fly back to Denver to sign the book deal. But not the revenge story they wanted. Instead, a different narrative how leaving isn't about running from something, but towards something. How the postcards we send, real or metaphorical, aren't just messages to others, but to ourselves. Outside, Rome's evening bells were ringing, calling people to vespers, to dinner, to life. Somewhere in America. A former marketing director was learning to see sunsets without calculating their ROI. The transformation was complete, just not the one anyone expected. 6 months later, I sat in a small cafe in Lisbon, the same one where I'd almost given up, the same bench overlooking the Tagus River where doubt had nearly won. But this time, I wasn't checking my bank balance with trembling fingers. I was writing. The book was almost finished. Postcards from the Edge: A Journey from Cubicle to Cosmos. The publisher had finally accepted my vision, not a revenge story, but a transformation story. Not just mine, but Richard's too. And the thousands who'd followed both our journeys. My laptop showed an email I'd been staring at for an hour. The sender, Richard Halden. Claire, I'm writing from a coffee shop in Portland. Started a nonprofit teaching business skills to homeless youth. No corner office, no Italian suits, no 9-iron. Just work that matters. I keep your postcards in my desk drawer. Different desk, different reason. They remind me that the fall isn't the end. Thank you for pushing me off the cliff. I needed to learn I had wings. Richard, P.S. I sent you something. Check your mail. I'd laughed, actually laughed. Not the bitter laugh of vindication, but the genuine laugh of life's absurd circles. The package had arrived that morning, inside a postcard. The image showed Portland's skyline in the rain. On the back, in Richard's precise handwriting, the view is different from ground level. Better, clearer, real. Thank you for the map. R. I tucked it into my journal, right next to the resignation letter I'd kept as a reminder. 2 documents, 6 months apart, charting a journey neither of us had expected. My Instagram had evolved beyond travel photos and corporate exodus stories. It had become a community of people rebuilding, reimagining, recreating their lives. Some had left toxic jobs. Others had transformed them from within. The hashtag #DSAP, Postcards from the Edge, had over 1 million uses, each one a small declaration of independence. I picked up a blank postcard from the cafe's rack. They sold them now. Knowing tourists like me collected them like memories. This one would be the last I'd document, the end of this chapter. But not for Richard, not for Instagram. This one was for me. On the front, Lisbon's famous yellow trams climbing an impossible hill. On the back, I wrote, Dear Claire from before. You thought revenge would taste like victory. It tastes like transformation. You thought proving Richard wrong would be enough. It wasn't. You had to prove yourself right. You sent postcards as weapons and they became invitations. You broke a man down and accidentally showed him how to rebuild. This isn't the ending you wrote. but it's the one you needed. The view from here worth every stamp. Claire from After. I addressed it to my old apartment in Denver, knowing it would never arrive, that some stranger would receive this cryptic message from Portugal and wonder what it meant. Or maybe they'd understand perfectly. Maybe they were sitting in their own cubicle, planning their own escape, needing their own permission slip to leave. The sun was setting over the Tagus, painting the river gold. Tourists were taking selfies. Locals were heading home from work. Life was happening in all its mundane, extraordinary glory. I opened my laptop again and typed the final words of the book. Richard was wrong when he said I'd come crawling back. But I was wrong too, thinking his destruction would be my salvation. We both had to fall to learn we could fly. The postcards I sent weren't breadcrumbs leading home. They were paper airplanes, showing both of us the way out. In the end, the best revenge wasn't watching him lose everything. It was discovering I had everything to gain. Some prisons require a key, others just require courage. And sometimes, the guard and the prisoner are the same person, waiting for someone to show them the door was never locked. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and ordered another coffee. Tomorrow I'd fly back to Denver for the book launch. I'd stand in a bookstore 3 blocks from Brightsphere Solutions and tell this story to whoever would listen. Maybe Richard would come. Maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. The postcards had done their job. They'd traveled thousands of miles to deliver a simple message. Leave. Live. Let go. Even if the person who needed to hear it most was the one sending them. The cafe owner brought my coffee with a smile. You finish your story? Yeah, I said, looking out at the river, at the endless horizon beyond. I think I finally did. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from right now. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever sent or wanted to send your own postcards to someone from your past? I'd love to hear your stories too.